David Martinez first saw Emma at Grind Coffee on a rainy Tuesday morning in March 2010. She was arguing with her laptop, auburn hair falling across her face as she frowned at the screen. When her coffee spilled across the table, David didn't hesitate. He grabbed napkins and rushed over. "Thank you," Emma laughed, her green eyes meeting his. "I think my presentation is fighting back." "What kind of presentation wages war at 8 a.m.? David asked, helping her clean up. "Marketing analysis for a boutique hotel chain. Apparently, very temperamental stuff." She gestured to the empty chair. "Buy me another coffee and I'll tell you more." That conversation lasted 3 hours. David, a construction project manager, with calloused hands and an easy smile, found himself captivated by Emma's quick wit and passion for her work. She was different from anyone he'd dated, sophisticated, driven, with a laugh that made him forget his own name. Their first official date was dinner at Romano's, a small Italian place where David nervously adjusted his tie every 5 minutes. Emma wore a black dress that made his breath catch, and when she reached across the table to touch his hand, electricity shot through him. "You're nervous," she said, smiling. "Terrified," he admitted. "You're way out of my league." "Lucky for you? I don't believe in leagues." She squeezed his fingers. "Just good people and bad people. You seem pretty good, David Martinez." The months that followed were a blur of stolen weekends, late-night phone calls, and the kind of passion David had only read about. Emma would show up at his construction sites with lunch, hard hat perched adorably on her head, making his co-workers whistle appreciatively. He'd surprise her at her office with flowers, earning approving nods from her colleagues. Their first "I love you" came on a warm June evening. They were painting David's bedroom. Emma had insisted the beige was soul-crushing, when paint somehow ended up in her hair. As David gently cleaned it out, she looked up at him with paint-smudged cheeks and said, "I love you, you know." "I love you too," he whispered, and they made love right there on the paint-spattered drop-cloth, surrounded by the smell of fresh latex and the sound of summer rain. By December, David was ring shopping. He proposed on New Year's Eve in the same coffee shop where they'd met, going down on one knee as the countdown began on the small TV in the corner. "Will you build a life with me?" he asked, and when she said yes through happy tears, the small crowd erupted in cheers. They married in August 2011, a simple ceremony in David's childhood church, with Emma radiant in flowing white silk. Their honeymoon in Tuscany was magical. Lazy mornings in bed, exploring ancient villages, sharing wine as the sun set over rolling hills. It was their last night in Italy when Emma emerged from the bathroom, pregnancy test in hand, tears streaming down her face. "David," she whispered, "we're going to have a baby." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small hotel room, both of them laughing and crying. That night, as they made love with a tenderness that took his breath away, David thought he was the luckiest man alive. He had no idea how wrong he was. 5 years later, David's world revolved around Jake's laughter echoing through their suburban home. The little boy with Emma's green eyes and what David thought was his own stubborn chin had become the center of his universe. "Dad, watch this!" Jake called from the backyard, attempting a cartwheel that ended in a giggling heap on the grass. David applauded from the deck, coffee mug in hand, already dressed in his coaching uniform for Saturday morning Little League. "That's my boy," he called back, his chest swelling with pride. Every weekend was the same beautiful routine. Pancakes, baseball practice, then ice cream if the team won. Jake worshipped his father, following him around like a devoted shadow. At the baseball field, David knelt beside Jake, adjusting his tiny helmet. "Remember what we practiced?" "Keep my eye on the ball and swing through," Jake recited seriously, his gap-toothed grin making David's heart melt. "That's right, champ." David ruffled his son's hair. Go show them what a Martinez can do. Jake's hit that day wasn't spectacular, but he made it to first base, beaming as David cheered from the sidelines. Later, sharing a victory sundae at Dairy Queen, Jake asked, Dad, will you teach me to drive when I'm older? Absolutely. We'll start with go-karts when you're 8, then move up to the real thing. And will you teach me about girls? David nearly choked on his ice cream. Where did that come from? Tommy's dad says girls have cooties, but you married Mom, so they can't be that bad. David laughed, thinking of Emma waiting at home. Their marriage had settled into comfortable rhythms. Work, family dinners, Jake's bedtime routine. But lately, he'd noticed Emma seemed distant, distracted. She'd started working later, taking more business trips. That evening, after Jake was asleep, David found Emma in their bedroom, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Penny for your thoughts? He slipped his arms around her waist from behind. Just tired, she murmured, but didn't lean into his embrace the way she used to. Come here. He turned her to face him, searching her eyes. Talk to me. It's nothing, really. Work stress. But when he kissed her, she seemed to melt into him, as if remembering something she'd forgotten. Her hands fumbled with his shirt buttons, and suddenly they were moving with desperate hunger toward their bed. Their lovemaking that night was intense, almost frantic. Emma clung to him afterward, tears sliding down her cheeks in the darkness. I love you, she whispered against his shoulder. I love you too, he replied, stroking her hair. Always. But even as he held her, David couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Emma's phone buzzed constantly now, and she'd started password protecting it. She'd canceled their last 2 date nights, claiming work emergencies. One Tuesday evening, as David helped Jake with homework at the kitchen table, Emma's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and quickly declined the call. Who was that? David asked casually. Nobody important. Just work. But her cheeks flushed pink and she wouldn't meet his eyes. Jake looked up from his math problems. Mom, why do you have 2 phones now? David's pencil froze midair. Emma had been carrying a second phone for weeks, claiming it was a work device, but something in Jake's innocent observation made David's stomach tighten. It's boring grown-up stuff, sweetheart, Emma said quickly, kissing Jake's forehead. Finish your math. That night, after Emma fell asleep, David lay awake staring at the ceiling. His wife of 6 years, the mother of his child, felt like a stranger beside him. Her breathing was shallow, restless, and when she mumbled in her sleep, David could swear he heard another man's name. But when morning came and Jake bounded into their room, jumping between them on the bed, Emma's smile seemed genuine again. She laughed as Jake tickled her, and for a moment, David convinced himself he'd imagined everything. Family pancakes, Emma suggested, and Jake cheered. In the kitchen, watching Emma flip pancakes while Jake set the table with serious concentration, David pushed his doubts aside. This was his family. This was real. Whatever shadows he thought he saw were just his imagination. But deep down, a small voice whispered that foundations built on shifting sand eventually crumble. By 2020, the comfortable rhythms of their life had developed subtle discordant notes that David couldn't ignore. 10-year-old Jake needed routine blood work before a minor surgical procedure to remove his tonsils, and David accompanied him to the pediatrician's office. Don't worry, buddy. David squeezed Jake's hand as the nurse prepared the needle. Remember when I got my blood drawn last month for my physical? Just a little pinch. Jake was brave, barely wincing as the vial filled, with dark red blood. Later, reviewing the paperwork with Dr. Patterson, David noticed something odd. Type AB positive? David frowned at the form. That seems unusual. Dr. Patterson nodded. Not the most common type, but perfectly normal. About 4% of the population. Driving home, David's mind wandered to genetics lessons from high school biology. He was type O. Emma was type A. He was almost certain. AB positive from those combinations seemed unlikely, but science had never been his strongest subject. That evening, he casually brought it up with Emma as she prepared dinner. "Did you know Jake is AB positive? I could have sworn you were type A." Emma's knife slipped, nearly catching her finger. Yes, I think so. Why? Just curious about the genetics? Isn't it rare for... David, can we not dissect our son's blood type over dinner? Emma's voice carried an edge he'd rarely heard. He's healthy. That's what matters. The sharpness of her response lodged in David's mind like a splinter. Over. The following weeks, he found himself noticing other small inconsistencies. Looking through old photo albums with Jake, he realized there were gaps. Missing pictures from around Jake's conception. Emma's pregnancy photos seemed sparse for someone who'd been so excited about becoming a mother. Emma's work schedule became increasingly erratic. She'd leave for client dinners and return home smelling like wine and unfamiliar cologne. Her second phone buzzed constantly, and she'd step outside to take calls, speaking in hushed tones. One evening, David decided to surprise her at her office with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. The receptionist looked confused when he asked for Emma. "She left around 3 for a client meeting," the young woman said. "Said she'd be out for the rest of the day." But Emma hadn't come home until after 10, claiming she'd been in back-to-back meetings until late. The lie sat heavy in David's chest as he drove home, the untouched pad thai growing cold beside him. Their physical intimacy, once passionate and frequent, became sporadic and strained. When they did make love, Emma seemed distant, her mind elsewhere. Sometimes she'd whisper, "I'm sorry," afterward, but when David asked what for, she'd claim she was just tired. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in November. David had taken a half day to catch up on household tasks when Emma's phone, the personal one, rang on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, and the caller ID showed Tom, work. David stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. Emma had mentioned Tom before, a colleague in her department. But why was he calling her personal phone? And why did Emma tense up whenever his name came up in conversation? When Emma emerged from the bathroom, hair wrapped in a towel, she immediately noticed her phone's position had shifted. "Did someone call?" she asked, too casually. "Tom from work," David said, watching her face carefully. "Seemed urgent." "He called 3 times. Emma's face went pale, then flushed. "It's probably about the Henderson account. I should call him back." She grabbed the phone and disappeared into their bedroom, closing the door behind her. David could hear her voice through the thin walls. Soft, intimate. Nothing like the professional tone she used with other colleagues. That night, as Emma slept, fitfully beside him, David made a decision that would change everything. He quietly got out of bed and opened Emma's laptop, still logged into her email. His hands shook as he scrolled through her messages. What he found made his blood run cold. Months of intimate emails with Tom Richardson from her marketing department. Messages that spoke of love, of stolen moments, of guilt and longing. The timestamps showed their affair had been going on for over a year. But it was one message buried deep in the thread that stopped David's heart completely. "Sometimes I look at Jake and wonder what our life would have been like if things had been different from the beginning. If I'd been brave enough to choose you 12 years ago." David's world tilted on its axis. 12 years ago, right around the time Jake was conceived. 2 months after discovering Emma's emails, David sat in his truck outside a medical laboratory, a sealed envelope containing Jake's paternity test results trembling in his hands. The past 8 weeks had been torture, pretending everything was normal while his world cracked beneath him. He'd played the devoted father at Jake's basketball games, cheering from the sidelines while Emma sat beside him, her hand occasionally finding his butt feeling foreign now. He'd helped with homework, tucked Jake into bed with their ritual of 3 stories, and answered endless questions about baseball statistics, all while a poisonous doubt ate away at his certainty about everything he'd built his life around. The envelope felt heavier than it should. Inside was either confirmation that his worst fears were unfounded or the complete destruction of 12 years of his life. With shaking fingers, David tore it open. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words blurred as his vision clouded. David read the line again, then again, hoping somehow the clinical language would rearrange itself into something bearable. But the science was absolute, merciless in its clarity. Jake wasn't his son. David drove home in a daze, muscle memory navigating familiar streets while his mind reeled. Every memory now felt contaminated. Jake's first steps, his first word, Dada. Teaching him to ride a bike, their camping trips, bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better. All of it built on a lie so fundamental that it shook David's faith in reality itself. Emma was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he walked in, and Jake was at the table working on a science project about genetics. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. "Dad, did you know that eye color comes from both parents?" Jake asked excitedly. "I got green eyes like Mom, but I might have gotten other stuff from you that we can't see." David's throat closed up. That's interesting. Buddy?" Emma looked up from the stove, and something in David's expression made her freeze. "David, are you okay?" "We need to talk," he said quietly. "After dinner." The meal was agony. Jake chattered about his day while David mechanically ate, unable to taste anything. Emma barely touched her food, shooting worried glances at David. When Jake finally went upstairs to start his homework, David closed the kitchen door. "I know," he said simply. Emma's face crumbled. "David, I know about Tom. I know about the affair. And I know about Jake." He pulled out the paternity test results and placed them on the table between them. Emma stared at the papers as if they were a death sentence. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "How long have you known?" "2 months since I found your emails. 2 hours since I got definitive proof that I've been living a lie for 12 years. "David, please!" "12 years, Emma?" His voice cracked. 12 years of getting up at 5 a.m. for Little League practice, 12 years of parent-teacher conferences and scraped knees and birthday parties, 12 years of believing I was building something real with my family. Emma reached for him, but he stepped back. "It wasn't all a lie. I love you, David. I've always loved you." "But you loved him more." The words were bitter in his mouth. "Enough to sleep with him while we were engaged. Enough to let me raise another man's child while he got to live his life free and clear. It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like." David's composure finally shattered. "Tell me how you looked me in the eyes every single day for 12 years, knowing what you'd done. Tell me how you let me fall in love with a boy who was never mine. Tell me how you could watch me sacrifice everything for a family that was built on your betrayal." Emma was sobbing now, her words barely coherent. "I was scared. I was young and stupid and scared. By the time I knew, for sure, you already loved Jake so much. You were such a good father. Better than Tom ever could have been. I thought maybe it didn't matter." "It didn't matter?" David laughed bitterly. "My entire identity as a man, as a father. And you thought it didn't matter? Jake is your son in every way that counts." "Don't." David's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare try to minimize this. That boy upstairs doing homework at the kitchen table where I helped him learn to read, he has another man's DNA, another man's eyes, another man's laugh. And every single day I see him, I'm going to remember that the person I trusted most in this world betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made them both freeze. Jake appeared in the doorway, pajamas on and toothbrush in hand. "Dad? Are you and Mom fighting?" David looked at this child he'd loved with his whole heart and felt something break inside him that might never heal. Those green eyes, Tom's eyes, looked up at him with such trust, such love. "Just talking, buddy," David managed. "Go brush your teeth." As Jake's footsteps retreated upstairs, Emma whispered, "What happens now?" David picked up the paternity test results, his hands steadier now. "Now I decide whether to stay and try to rebuild my life from the ashes, or walk away from the only family I've ever known." The choice felt impossible. But one thing was certain. The man who'd walked into this kitchen an hour ago, the man who'd believed in the simple truth of his own life, was gone forever. 3 weeks had passed since David learned the truth, and he'd been sleeping in the guest room, unable to share a bed with Emma while his world remained in fragments. The house felt like a minefield. Every family photo on the wall, every one of Jake's drawings on the refrigerator, a reminder of the fundamental lie his life had become. Jake knew something was wrong. The 11-year-old had started acting out at school, his grades slipping as tension filled their home like toxic gas. Emma moved through the house like a ghost, red-rimmed eyes following David's every movement, waiting for him to announce his decision. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Jake approached David in his makeshift bedroom, clutching his well-worn copy of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. "Dad, you forgot story time again," Jake said quietly, and the hurt in his voice nearly destroyed David. David looked at this child, Tom's child, and saw every bedtime story of the past 11 years, every fever he'd nursed through the night, every scraped knee he'd bandaged. Biology said Jake wasn't his, but 11 years of love doesn't disappear because of a DNA test. "Come here, buddy," David said, patting the bed beside him. As Jake curled up against his side, David opened the familiar book and began to read. Jake's breathing eventually evened out into sleep, and David found himself stroking the boy's hair that might carry another man's genes but still felt like home under his fingers. The next morning, David made his choice. He called Emma into the living room after Jake left for school. She sat across from him, hands folded tightly in her lap, bracing for the worst. "I've been thinking about what love really means," David began. "For 11 years I thought it meant blood, shared DNA, biological connection, but that's not what made me a father." Emma's eyes widened, hope flickering across her features. "What made me a father was 3 a.m. feedings and first steps and teaching him to ride a bike. It was watching him discover books and cheering at little league games and holding him when he had nightmares." David's voice grew stronger. "Tom contributed sperm. I contributed everything else." "David, I'm not finished." He held up a hand. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way. You stole 12 years of truth from me, and I don't know if I can ever fully forgive that. Our marriage, I don't know if it can survive this." Emma's face crumpled, but David continued. "But Jake didn't betray me. Jake didn't lie to me. Jake didn't choose any of this. And I'll be damned if I let your mistakes cost that boy the only father he's ever known." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm Jake's dad, no matter what. Some test says. I'm saying that I choose him, the same way I've chosen him every day for 11 years without even realizing it was a choice." David leaned forward. "But you need to understand something, Emma. This family, what's left of it, gets rebuilt on my terms." Over the next few weeks, the terms became clear. Tom, who had panicked when he learned David knew the truth, wanted to establish a relationship with Jake. David's answer was swift and final, not while Jake was a minor. Tom had given up his right to fatherhood when he'd chosen to let another man raise his child. Emma began individual therapy to address the root causes of her betrayal, while David started his own counseling to process the trauma of discovering his entire foundation had been built on lies. They attended couples therapy together. The sessions, raw and painful but necessary. Jake, told only that his parents were working through some difficulties, slowly began to relax as the household tension decreased. David made a conscious effort to be present, really present, for every moment with his son. Each bedtime story, each homework session, each catch in the backyard became a deliberate choice to be Jake's father. One evening, 6 months after. Learning the truth, David found Jake looking through a photo album from their camping trip the previous summer. "Dad, are you and Mom going to get divorced?" Jake asked with the directness of childhood. David sat beside him, studying a photo of Jake roasting marshmallows over a campfire, chocolate smeared across his grinning face. "I don't know yet, buddy. We're trying to work things out." "But you'll still be my dad, right? Even if you and Mom don't live together anymore?" David looked into those green eyes, no longer a painful reminder of betrayal, but simply his son's eyes, and felt certainty settle in his chest like a warm stone. "Always," he said firmly. "No matter what happens between your mom and me, nothing will ever change the fact that you're my son and I'm your dad. That's not something that can be broken." Jake smiled and leaned against David's shoulder. "Good, because I don't want any other dad." As they sat together looking at pictures of their life, their real life, built not on genetics but on choice and commitment and love, David realized that the most important truths couldn't be measured in a laboratory. Family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up day after day and choosing to love someone regardless of what science or betrayal or pain might say. Jake was his son, not because of DNA, but because of something far stronger. The daily decision to be a father, made, knew each morning for 11 years and counting. That choice, David knew, was the only truth that really mattered.